I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1849er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to share a story with you coming from the great state of Wisconsin. There are some people up there in the Wisconsin National Guard that have done something special that anybody in Vietnam who flew a helicopter or rode in a helicopter in Vietnam would appreciate. They have restored a Vietnam-era Huey. I took a look at this story and was interested because they were restoring a Bell Huey from the Vietnam War. My interest level went up several notches when I discovered that this particular aircraft flew in A Company 158th Aviation Battalion in the 101st Airborne Division over there in Vietnam. They were known as the Ghost Riders. I heard that name many times when we would go out on fire missions. Primarily LZ preps, and we would support the aircraft who were taking the troops into the landing zone. There were many of those names I remember to this day. There were the Ghost Riders. There was the Lancer from B Company of the 158th. Then there was the Phoenix aircraft from C Company. Also remember other such names as the Comancheros from A Company, 101st Aviation Battalion. And then, of course, there were the Kingsmen from B Company, 101st Aviation Battalion. And then there were the Black Widows from C Company, 101st Aviation Battalion, just to name a few. When I heard the name Ghost Rider, it immediately brought back many memories to me of my time over there flying Cobra gunships with A Battery, 4th of the 77th, when we would go out and support these slick companies when they were making their insertions. We call them LZ prep missions. It was a lot like scheduling a ballet because everything had to be exactly on time. To this day, I don't know how we did it. The timing would start when the slicks would be lined up a few miles from the LZ. They knew exactly how long it was going to take because the tube artillery would be in the process of firing an LZ prep. And then, magically, 2 minutes before the first Huey would touch down, the tubes would stop, their last round would be a white smoke round, and immediately the ARA Cobras would go in and strike the LZ for the final 2 minutes before the touchdown of the first aircraft. The last ARA rocket would be speeding toward the LZ as the first Huey approached the LZ. They would be escorted by their own organic gunships, taking them right down to the ground. Everything had to be done perfectly at the right time or the whole thing would fall apart like a house of cards. In the ranks of the ARA pilots, the ultimate designation was to be that of a section leader who was qualified to conduct LZ preps. That's why the name Ghost Riders brings back many memories to me. The interesting thing about this story is one of the pilots who flew that same aircraft in Vietnam was able to go there and see it, get back up into the cockpit, and relive those exciting times. Unfortunately for this particular pilot, he got shot up pretty badly, so I don't know if those memories are fond or not. I'm going to share this story with you because it is so good. Very well written, very informative, and also very memorable to anybody who flew helicopters in the 101st Airborne Division over there in Vietnam. I'm sure the elements of this story would be poignant to other pilots who flew with other units. But, pardon me, I'm partial toward the 101st. The title of the story I'm going to share with you is Volk Field in Camp Douglas restores Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter shot down in the Vietnam War. The story was submitted by Master Sgt. Erik Figi and Tech Sergeant Kimberly Moll, both of the Wisconsin National Guard. They did a great job on this story, and that's another reason I'm sharing it. It needs to be heard by as many people as possible because the writing and the subject of the story are so good. Let's take a look at the story. Dateline, Camp Douglas, Wisconsin. By the way, Camp Douglas is located about 90 miles northwest of Madison, Wisconsin. I encourage everyone in the area to go by and take a look at this particular aircraft. It has a storied history. Here's the story. Again, Dateline, Camp Douglas, Wisconsin. During the Vietnam War, over 7,000 of the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, nicknamed the Huey, participated in various actions and roles, earning the title of workhorse and becoming an iconic symbol of the conflict. Equally as memorable and vital to our collective understanding of this era in American history were the stories of sacrifice, courage, and heroism formed by the communal experiences of men and women that flew these indispensable birds of the sky. Inspired by this history are the parallel stories of one of these Hueys, its pilot, and the dedicated airman preserving its legacy. Today, a Bell UH-1 Iroquois Huey sits quietly basking in the warm Wisconsin summer, visited by the only occasional robin in this COVID-19 reality. Its rotor blades haven't turned in decades, its landing skids fixed firmly to the ground, and the view from the cockpit only takes in the changing of the seasons. The final chapter of Huey 66-16171 takes place under the purview of the Wisconsin National Guard Museum at Volk Field Combat Readiness Training Center, Camp Douglas, Wisconsin. Here, museum caretakers are entrusted with its legacy and where two individuals decades apart and worlds away would find a common connection to Huey 66-16171. It was October 1967, and a young 23-year-old Army captain by the name of Eustace Shiver found himself on his first tour in Vietnam. On one particular mission, he was flying Huey 66-1617 with the Ghost Riders, A Company, 158th Aviation Battalion, 101st Airborne Division, over the Laotian Vietnam border. Shiver, along with one other pilot and 11 airmen in his Huey, began to take fire from Viet Cong on the ground. Now get this. A single round entered and exited his left arm, but hit an airman directly behind him, instantly killing him. That must have been some bullet. A second round lodged in Shiver's left leg, breaking the bone and traveling down the length of his femur where it still resides today. That must have been very painful. Shiver, the airman aboard, and the Huey itself were under a crippling barrage. The helicopter began to trail smoke behind it, and its pilot knew he had to get to safety fast. But the barrage of gunfire was too intense. Then it happened. It's like coming straight out of heaven. A Sky Raider flown by Air Force pilot Major Frank Armstrong dropped a napalm bomb on the enemy forces, ending the attack on Shiver's Huey, allowing his and the other airmen's escape. I'm assuming Shiver was able to fly that aircraft back to its home base at Camp Eagle. After saving the lives of Shiver and his crew, Armstrong and his plane crashed into a nearby hillside, presumably killing him. To this day, Shiver continues to search for the remains of Armstrong and his aircraft. His mission is to bring closure to his widow and a final tribute to the man who saved his life. Shiver stayed 2 weeks in the base's hospital before being transferred to a naval hospital in Japan, and finally ending up back home in rehabilitation at Fort Gordon, Georgia. His military service continued, going back to Vietnam in 1970 for 1 year. returning to the U.S. to work as an aviation advisor, then at the Pentagon as an infantry task force commander, and then 15 years in the National Guard in Wisconsin. Shiver would hold a few other posts before retiring in 2008 as a lieutenant colonel. He had turned the pages on numerous chapters in his life and military career, but one remained. And when he turned its page, he would be transported back to the fateful day in October of 1967. Master Sgt. David S. Bingham, an Air National Guard crew chief assigned to the 132nd Wing, Des Moines, Iowa, visited Volk Field numerous times since 2004. During one of those visits, he passed by Huey 6616171 and noticed the toll that years as a static display had taken on the old bird. At this point, Bingham did not know the story behind the Huey, but still chose to make it his mission to repair it. And he had a plan. That's very important, to have a plan. That is the second principle I listed in my book about the 5 principles of success. You have to have a plan if you're going to be successful. And Bingham was very successful. Bingham was the right airman for the job, with 9 years of experience in working on Hueys and similar aircraft. Couple that know-how with 29 years of work on aircraft, and he had the skills, knowledge, and passion for completing the mission. Initially, he reached out to the maintenance squadron chief for the 115th Fighter Wing in Madison, Wisconsin, Chief Master Sergeant Thomas A. Gates, for assistance. The plan they devised was to have the Huey 171 elevators transported to the 115 FW, where it would be reskinned. If you are unaware of the term reskinning in the aviation field, it means that the old sheet metal would come off and new sheet metal would go on in its place with the final step of a fresh coat of paint. Once this process was complete, Bingham would return to Volk Field and put the new skins back on the Huey. In 2011, Eustace Shiver had some time on his hands in retirement and began researching the Ghost Riders on the internet. He discovered that a few remaining team members would meet every other year to reconnect and share in their collective experiences from the Vietnam conflict. Eustace decided then and there that he was going to attend their next meeting, marking the first time since 1960 that he would reunite with his fellow airmen from this era. Little did he know that this meeting would reveal a mystery long forgotten. What became of Huey 66-16171 after that fateful day in October of 1967? At his Ghost Rider reunion, the airman Eustace reconnected with informed him that the Vietnam Helicopter Association keeps a listing of all helicopters by number. After some further research through this database, Eustace discovered a familiar tail number, 66-16171. The retired military officer knew what he had to do. Come the spring of 2020, he would pack up his RV, leave his Florida home, and hit the road for a small National Guard museum in Wisconsin. A great adventure for the spring of 2020. The grass would have been green when Eustace arrived at Volk Field sometime in May of 2020. Only a few steps from the Wisconsin National Guard Museum itself, he would find the weathered rotor blades of the aircraft he once knew, Huey 171. With his feet fixed firmly next to the landing skids that he once stood upon, he would hoist himself into the cockpit and look out over the prairie before him, one side of the glass witnessing the present, the other remembering the past. It would be a bittersweet moment. Machine and man connected yet again as the years melted away and an airman reconnected another chapter of his life. But this vision for Eustace would not come to pass as 2020 became the year of the virus of COVID-19. So that whole paragraph was nothing more than a dream. That same May, Master Sgt. Bingham would come to replace the elevators on the old bird, probably the same time as Eustis's visit, the two men connecting over the Huey. Eustis sharing its past and Bingham preserving its future. Bingham would have learned from the pilot himself the storied history of the aircraft and its crew. He would have related to Eustis how a local pilot had shown him the patches over the original skin where the bullets had passed through and impacted Shiver and his crew. Bingham may have stated that he was impressed by the story of heroism and courage from a past war. He would then go on to express an elevated sense of pride and duty in what he and his fellow airmen would be accomplishing with preserving the old bird for future generations to connect with its history. And yet, like so many plans of 2020, this meeting of men whose parallel stories were interconnecting never came to pass. And while the parallel lives of Eustis and Bingham never physically crossed on the historic grounds of Volk Field, the restoration work on Huey 6616171 did continue over the summer of 2020 through the dedicated efforts of numerous airmen, past and present, with the new skins for the old bird being applied in August. A number of individuals are to thank for this project, including Chief Master Sgt. Thomas Gates of the 115th Fighter Wing, who aided in repairing the elevators to be painted and transported, retired Master Sgt. Rick McDonald, who painted the elevators, the Iowa National Guard, who donated the paint, and Senior Master Sgt. Bobby Shepard of the 132nd Wing, who assisted Master Sgt. Bingham in removing the damaged elevators. Tell you the truth here, I have no idea what they're talking about damaged elevators on a Huey. Continuing on, Bingham related the importance of a project like this to not just a preservation of the past, but also a telling of an important story for present and future generations. Think about the history behind all those aircraft, he said. Wonder where that aircraft has been and what it has done. Each aircraft has a story. And so Huey 66-16171 sits waiting on the museum grounds, the sound of jets training overhead, a simple reminder of its legacy. The old bird waits to reconnect with the pilot from its past and for a return to normalcy when the Wisconsin National Guard Museum visitors can once again learn its history and the further stories of the aircraft and military artifacts that comprise the museum's collections. At the end of the day, these two parallel stories of Eustis's past connection with Huey number 171 and the team Bingham worked with for its safeguarding represent a converging mission of history, of sacrifice and preservation of the stories that are a part of our shared military heritage that no pandemic can thwart. That's the story out of Camp Douglas, Wisconsin, about the restoration of a Huey that flew in A Company, 158th Aviation Battalion, 101st Airborne Division, who were known as the Ghost Riders. That was a wonderful story written in a unique manner. It sounds a little like Master Sgt. Figi and Tech Sergeant Moll are trying to get a job as writers for Netflix movies. Netflix movies are always doing flashbacks. That was very interesting how they did that. That was a wonderful story. I hope you enjoyed it. I encourage you to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Check out episode 1849. There you will see a picture of Eustis Shiver sitting there in the same cockpit seat that he occupied back in 1967, where the VC shot him more than once. He looks real good to this very day sitting there in that aircraft. Now, for your information, that picture on the podcast website was taken back in 2013. That was prior to the restoration of the aircraft. Can you imagine how Eustis is going to feel when he goes back up there to Wisconsin after this COVID virus thing is over with and sits in that restored aircraft? They'll have to get Figi and Moll back together again and write another story because I'm sure it will be worth noting. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1849er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these programs. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?